Welcome to episode 5 of the SNARLcast about indie wargames and their design, coming to you from Snarling Badger Studios. I'm Adam, and I'm here with Vince. How are you doing, Vince?
I'll tell you what, man, I am very excited both about our topic tonight and just actually about life in general right now. We're recording this just a few days before we go to Adepticon, so this is always a super exciting time.
Indeed. Yeah, I'm looking forward to Adepticon. I got a bunch of things I gotta get done beforehand, as per usual, but not painting for once. I see a lot of people online who are like, "Oh, I got to get my army done before Adepticon," and I'm like, "You knew when Adepticon was coming, right?" I mean, I guess I can say the same thing, or same thing could be said to me about the other things I have to get done. I get it, but at least this time I'm not having to worry about getting miniatures painted. Neither do you, I don't think. Do you?
No, I do not. The pre-event crunch is real.
Yeah,
humans just always underestimate things like that. They think, oh well, that's so far away. I've got so much time, and it's not until the light at the end of the tunnel is bearing down on them that they realize the train is about to hit them, as it were.
Oh yeah, it's always, oh god, I got a month, and then it goes, yeah, now I've got 2 days. It's just
right.
It always happens. It goes like, where did that 28 days go or whatever? I don't know. I feel like that's something we should be putting some science money into, frankly. Yeah. Today I went to GaryCon.
You did. I'm pretty jealous. It's something I've always wanted to go to. We were talking about this a little before the recording. I want to go because a lot of my heroes whose names are on the books I read growing up go to this thing. And so I don't know, maybe I'll make the pilgrimage next year.
Yeah, it's I didn't get to go for a long time, as it turned out. I had to do the Every Other Sunday show, got done at 11, got in the car, drove 2 hours, was there, got there like around 1, and at least the vendor hall closes at 2, which is real weird. Nearly every other convention I ever go to, a Sunday's shorter, and it's usually 4. So that was odd. But
Standard.
I didn't go to go and hang around and have fun, though I did actually talk to a bunch of people. I bumped into a bunch of people I know, everything like that. But I was mainly going to our friend Adam from the Army Painter. He's staying up here in the north instead of going back to Louisiana for 2 days and then coming back up here for Adepticon. So he's staying in the same town as our good friend Sam lives, and they're going to hang out and paint jam and stuff like that. And but he wasn't 100% sure how he was going to get up here from Lake Geneva. He was initially thinking an Uber, and I was like, I don't think that's going to work. Yeah, well, expensive Uber, and can you even get someone to drive you 2.5 hours Uber? That's the other question, right. So I was like, well, I've been wanting to come to because GaryCon's been the same weekend as Adepticon for 5 years.
Yeah, it's the problem. But now it's different, a week apart.
Well, let's hope they keep it that way.
I hope so. I hope they do. I honestly, next year, I think what I'd like to do is make a week of it like Adam did. Thinking about that when I heard about what Adam was doing, I was other Adam, not you, obviously.
Yeah.
I was like, no, that's a great idea. I'll come up, go to GaryCon, then just get up there, hang out with you and Sam for a couple days, and then just ride along with someone down to Adepticon. Perfect.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The Wisconsin week, as we would call it there.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, it was kind of weird and sleet-ish on the way back, so the driving was just a little sketch, but not bad. It was mostly fine. But yeah, so that was what was going on with me, and we were just talking a little bit about our next game and where the progress is on that. Things are on track.
Yeah, we were setting our dates for final draft, that kind of thing. Basically, where we are is Adam is in what we would call right now the layout phase.
Yes.
This is the part where Adam has a lot of work to do, and Vince sits back and goes, "Anything I can do? Nope. Okay, great."
Sure.
Which is fine. This is the quiet part of this whole cycle for me,
right?
And so we got that drop dead date put together, and that gives us enough time. I think people don't understand how when you're doing a physical book, it has to be done way in advance of when you're going to release it, because you've got to have the time to get proofs and
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff. So that
If
takes
you're
time.
if you're just doing a PDF, the world is your oyster. You can
That's
do
right.
because you can literally just be like, "Hey, I'm done with it," and now it's live. Like, it's very, very fast. There's no messing around with the print on demand books. The company we work with requires that you upload everything, blah blah blah, all that stuff, and then request a proof, and that proof will show up between let's say 4 and 12 days from now, and you'll get it,
Crazy.
and it's random. And then you have to look it over and everything, and then either go, oh geez, we've missed that, or we got to fix that, or you go, yep, everything looks awesome. And once they've got the everything looks awesome, then you can put it live and everything. But you do have to go through that hoop, as it were. So yeah, have you painted or played anything interesting?
So I started reading, painting or playing. No, I'm working on another goblin. I finished up these fun little goblins that I got from Goobs. I'm working on another one now just because I
Hmm.
wanted something very simple and low stress because I didn't want to get into a big project right before leaving for Adepticon for 5 days,
Yeah,
right?
that makes sense.
But I have been reading some of the Trench Crusade stuff. You got me fascinated, like our little mechanical talk and you talking about playing it. So I've been looking at some of that.
Hmm.
Because I think I want to maybe if you guys are going to play a game or something, I want to sit in on it. So whenever you do your game at Adepticon, I want to
Yeah,
just
yeah.
kind of watch the first time. That's how I like to learn a game. I actually like to watch other people play a game the first time before I try to play it. I don't know. Everybody learns in their own ways.
Yeah,
Um,
I think everybody learns by doing and then reading, attempting, and then or watching somebody else attempt and then going back and reading because then the reading makes
yeah,
a lot more
yeah.
sense. At least it does for me.
Agreed. You just can't get it completely from the book alone almost ever, right? You gotta have
No.
the actual kinesthetic experience.
Hmm.
So, like, the so yeah, but I'm interested in it. Obviously, you're getting me a couple figs for me to paint. I'll make a video for those.
Yep.
But, depending on what it is, that's not making a faction choice. Like, I wanna kinda really get into it and see what would
Hmm.
interest me and stuff like
Hmm.
that. So, yeah, but I think it's pretty cool. Obviously, I love the core design and everything we've talked about. So yeah,
It's just
why not
very
give it a try?
yeah. It's just very interesting to have like a system that seems at least at first blush to be quite simple, but then I think with over time it starts to change as far as I mean it's still simple. It's still a simple process, but it is definitely I think there's a lot of strategy that takes place as you're starting to implement that stuff. I think that's kind of the big thing.
I have always been a fan of low floor, high ceiling.
Sure.
Right? That's the goal because that means it's a that like if you can that's hard to design, admittedly. Right? It's actually really easy to do high floor, high ceiling or low floor, low ceiling. Those are the sort of defaults.
Yeah.
Um But, when you hit the sweet spot and get that low floor, high ceiling, that means you're in the spot of like a minute to learn, a lifetime to master type of games,
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that gives your game more replayability, more interest to a wider group of people, and just, more potential long-term fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see. What did I? Well, I finished the five kill team dudes, the church type dudes from that new kill team box.
Yeah. The
And
weirdos, the gang of weirdos.
yeah, not the corn guys with the robo legs, the other guys.
Yes.
And so they're finished up. Well, I got to matte varnish them, but I'll do that probably tomorrow. And yeah, they were fun. They were fun to paint. They were pretty simple, and I didn't really even kit bash them much. There was like one dude I swapped his head out with a head from some other company, but the rest of the guys they give you so many heads for the church dudes, and it's got a very simple kind of design where like back in the day with Space Marines where you just got like a bowl that's the neck and then you put the
Yeah, of
head in there
course.
that's got the bottom part, right, and you can
Absolutely.
position it however you want. And GW's been kind of going in a different direction a lot lately where you're like, oh
100%.
yeah, you gotta that head goes with that guy and that head is 4 parts and you're like, how did you make a head 4 parts? Like, what do you do? And so that they didn't do that with the church guys. The heads are there's like I don't know 11 guys in the box, but there's like 18 or 20 heads. So you got a lot of different choices
Love
and
it.
it's great. But they did still somehow make a guy in a robe like just his body 3 parts. And you're like, and it's because they want to make them more hollow so that it's over time when you print a buttload of them, then it's less plastic and it saves money and it
Sure.
drives shareholder value. And God forbid we do anything else.
Well, we
Except
all of us here are about shareholder
oh
value,
my
Adam, of
lord,
course. What
I
else could
can't
we
I
possibly be
can't get to
concerned with in the
sleep
world?
without thinking about shareholder value and how I may have potentially, influenced it to the positive during my daily routine. But anyway, yeah. So while I was at speaking of miniatures that I do like to build, I bought some when I was at Gary Con. I bought some of the Stargrave plastic miniatures from
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I picked up the Scavengers 2, which
Okay.
is weird because like they'll make models and they'll be like, oh, crew or troopers or whatever. But then if they make troopers 2, what that means is it's all ladies. Like the troopers is just dudes and troopers
Oh,
2 is ladies. And it's just been that way ever since they started doing that stuff for Frostgrave. Rather than saying female
weird.
troopers, they just say troopers 2 and it's all ladies. So I picked up Scavengers 2. So I've got a bunch of scavenger ladies now, I guess, so that I'll do
Okay.
fun kit bashing with, and it'll be great. So there's that. But otherwise, yeah, it's just basically getting things ready for Adepticon, where we're launching officially the podcast. There are people out there who've figured it out already. There are people out there who found it already. I looked earlier today and there was like 150 listens already to the different podcasts. So
Yeah, we're recording this the day before it officially launches. Like, it goes out
right.
there and we're all talking about it on social media and doing those kinds of things.
Mhm.
We've mentioned the YouTube channel, so that's gotten a lot of people went over and subbed. Thank you. So whether
Mhm.
you're following on your podcast catcher of choice or subscribing on YouTube or both, if you're a real hero,
Yeah, if you're
uh,
a real one.
absolutely. We thank you very much.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, people are clever, as it were, right? And so they
As
get
it
there.
turns out, if you just typed in Snarling Badger Studios into Spotify, it just came up. So that's
Sure.
yeah. You didn't have to know the name of the podcast; you just had to know who we are, and then it turned out just fine. So, but not
Got
everybody
them.
cared. So they're like, well, I'll just wait till they tell us what it's called, and then go from there, which is fine as well. But yeah. So there's that, and then also my Battle Phone bag is launching this week, so I've got to get some more social media stuff done for that, and all that jazz. So yeah, I am decided. You know what I should do? Everything at once. That's what I should do. That seems to be the plan.
It's the way we go. It's the
Yeah, it
way we
does seem to be
go.
the case. So, the topic this week, this episode, because we do it
Yeah.
every 2 weeks. The topic this episode is you and I were kind of going back and forth a little bit on this.
Yeah.
There was definitely some discussion.
I'm the one who pushed you for this topic.
You
I'll
did.
take full blame.
That's fine. That's fine.
If you
But
have a negative opinion about us discussing this topic, please address them to me, not to Uncle Adam.
that's fine. We either way, I'm interested in checking it out. But the idea, and it's something I don't remember if I put it into our list of ideas or if you did or not.
I
But
did.
either way, did you? Okay. So the question is basically, and the topic for today's podcast is: can anything bring down Games Workshop?
Yeah.
And you might ask yourself, well, Uncle Adam, how is that having anything to do with indie games and indie game design? Well, I mean, I think
We're going to get there. Don't worry.
yeah,
This
yeah.
will
Oh,
connect.
yeah. It does. It does connect, and I think that it's a little telling, actually, maybe. But nonetheless, I would like you to start because I think that you've got a tack that you'd like to take on this.
I do. So yeah, this will absolutely connect. Don't worry, everybody. Stay with us. Trust us. This is like a true crime podcast now at this point, right? It would be like, well, that's the avenue we should have went. We should have been like, who killed GW, right? And just been
Right.
like, dun dun dun, done like a 10 episode series. Anyways, okay. So can anything bring down GW? The real question here is, I think the way people often phrase this is what they mean when they ask the question is, can anything be bigger than Games Workshop and effectively vis-a-vis Warhammer, right?
Can anything beat Games Workshop?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And I think that, like, okay, let's explore that for a moment. I
Mhm.
actually think that's the wrong question, and we'll get to
Mhm.
why. Okay. I think, Adam, you and I are both aligned on this. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I want to rebuff this because if we didn't talk about it, people would be like, well, that's not what we're saying. Whatever. So we got
Right.
to do we
Indeed.
got to do the necessary first here. Okay. Can any game actually get bigger than Warhammer in this space, in the miniature wargaming space?
Mhm.
Okay. As a single game, to where you'd look at like an ICV2 report and see, some other company nailing it. All right.
So for people who don't know what ICV2 is, real quick, it's a website. It's I as in the letter I, C as in the letter C, V as in letter V 2.com. And you should take a look at it because it is a website that is aimed towards talking about the industry, all kinds of tabletop gaming, but also gets into comic books and all kinds of things like that. But they do every quarter, they will show ranks of how and the thing that we're always looking for is non-collectible miniatures. Is that the
Yes, correct.
particular? Yes.
Non-collectible miniatures. Yes.
Non-collectible miniatures. Collectible miniatures would be like Hero Clicks and stuff like that, which has pretty much got that whole area kind of, on lock. But non-collectible miniatures are things like, Games Workshop stuff and whatever. And they will always rank it, and they get their information from stores, right?
Correct. That's right.
Mm-hmm. And so it's not like direct sales. It's not coming from distribution, stuff like that. It's the stores saying, we sold more of this than we sold of that.
Correct. That's exactly right. It's just them, and it's the store owners. That's a survey that goes out of basically what you would think of as FLGSs. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's about how much stock they moved. They survey every month, and then the store owners go. Now they're free to complete the survey however you want, assuming that you're getting to some kind of truth of the law of large numbers, right?
Right, exactly.
But so, okay, the first question is, can anything this big fall? That's the question we need to answer first, right? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that is in general, yes. Simple yes.
Yeah.
Okay. The world is littered with things that seemed inevitable and large and unbeatable until they were and they fell. Mm-hmm. Right? Sometimes for good, sometimes for brief periods of time, only to resurge again. This is across industries and everywhere, right? That's the story of humankind. So nothing is forever, even when it feels like it is. We'll just say that first. Mm-hmm. So in general, of course, the answer is yeah, maybe. Of course, something could beat them in the sort of imaginary world of the long enough time frame, or they do something stupid.
But honestly, and in the tech industry, it's way faster.
Sure. Yes.
Not Google. Sorry, Yahoo owned Tumblr at one point, and they were offered $1 billion for Tumblr, and they said no, that's not enough money. And then, maybe 5 years later, they ended up selling it to WordPress for $25 million because that was the best they could get, and it was that fast. So the tech world is weird that way, and obviously, GW has been the big thing for a very long time. But I mean, we've seen actual human empires fall. Everything big can fall eventually.
That's right. I mean, Google just fell below 90% in searches for the first time last month. Okay, that's still very much market dominance. But keep in mind, they were at basically 97% or something like that for the past 20 years. So it actually is a very meaningful move.
I can guarantee you, it's because of that stupid AI that they've been shoving down our throat.
That is correct. It's absolutely yes. People are just using GPT and stuff to search. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So at any rate, but let's zoom in on our industry. So the easy example here of the sort of rise and fall that we could pin to that's close is something like D&D, right? Mm-hmm. So D&D comes out, it sort of creates the role-playing game space effectively as its own market. Mm-hmm. Basically the early 80s are some of the biggest years adjusted for inflation it ever had. Still, by the way, well into the 2010s, it was some of the biggest years by raw count of sales. You know what I'm saying? Number of units sold.
Number of units shifted, but it wasn't necessarily making them as much money as it should.
Correct.
They almost published themselves out of business.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
So you have incredible success, the early 80s especially, and all this, and then it just goes on this very long, slow decline until eventually TSR gets sold off, gets bought by Wizards of the Coast, right? And there was periods in the late 90s where if you looked at those ICV2 charts or their equivalents, D&D wasn't the highest selling role-playing game anymore. Okay? That would happen.
That's why Wizards of the Coast was able to buy them, I'm pretty sure. I remember going to Gen Con. I was going to Gen Con in Milwaukee, which was owned by TSR. I would go to Gen Con. I started in 92. And I remember in one of those very early years walking past a booth with a terrible name for a company. I'm like, God, this is a god-awful name. And it was a company called Wizards of the Coast. And they had a 10x10 booth. And less than a decade later, they owned Gen Con. And I don't mean in a metaphysical sense or I mean in a literal sense. They had bought TSR, Dungeons & Dragons, and Gen Con. And it took a decade, not even.
Yeah, Peter Adkinson and Ryan Dancy and other people who organized that whole deal. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So now fast forward. So D&D's on a downslope. You're like, oh, D&D's over. If you go back and look at articles from the time, people are like, it's done. This thing is dead. It's cooked. Right? Stick a fork in it. Okay. Let's fast forward like 4 years later to the launch, or 3 years later, whatever you want to say, somewhere in that range, to the launch of third edition and the open game license. And all of a sudden, everything is on OGL. D&D is the biggest game in the world again. Nothing else even matters. All other games are destroyed and in their way, and left is just corpses in their wake. Right? Yeah. This is like the month after Nirvana came out is what it looks like in the rest of the RPG space, right?
Like you were Skid Row, and you were just leaving all the extra bottles of booze at the in the green room, and then going on to the next show. And within 2 years, you're taking the bottles of booze with you because you don't know if you're going to have your entire rider when you get to the next show.
That's right. And then, by the way, that's not even the last time that happened. You could talk about like the transition into fourth and the crash there, and then the resurgence at the launch of fifth edition and how it became so culturally dominant and all this and blah, 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 blah. My point is, as an industry, it's had lots of very big ups and very big downs. If we swing over to GW themselves, even looking at them, I went back and looked at some of the reports, and GW has really dominated this space for a long time, but there have been a few quarters here and there, going back years, where they weren't actually the best selling game. It's very rare, but it had occasionally happened.
There were 2 quarters in a row on ICV2 where Star Wars X-Wing was in first place and 40K was in second place. And that had not happened 2 quarters in a row ever before, I don't think.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I forget when it was, 2015?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think somewhere it was 2015 or 16. Yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah. Basically, pretty near the, like, not at the launch of that Star Wars stuff, but very shortly afterward. I think it was.
Yeah, not too long after. And I want to say maybe 7th edition. 7th edition was a pretty low spot for
when 40K was in like a super low spot, and Fantasy had died, and AOS had like its way out in the market and all this. Right? It was a rough spot. Okay, so it's happened. We've seen these low points before. All right, and the funny thing about these other things, and this is what I want to discuss here real quick, Adam. I want to get your take on this. When you look at the other games that have occasionally risen to the top, so this was stuff like War Machine or Star Wars. Right now, MCP is nipping at their heels, right? MCP has been showing in a lot of second places. Yes. So like behind 40K. Marvel Crisis Protocol. Sorry, I won't speak in acronyms. But most of these throughout the history, now I don't know how MCP is going to work out, but if you look at stuff like the War Machine or that kind of stuff, or you look at Star Wars, a lot of these have been blips. They would rise up for a minute, they'd become very popular, and then they'd sink back down or whatever. Like eventually GW would regain its dominance.
Right.
And I think that there's a couple of factors here. A lot of the games that have come up as a blip have either A, been a popular IP, so that would be like Star Wars and Marvel, or they're smaller, skirmishier, stuff like that, right? Just like easier to play and get into. Warhammer is classically a very difficult game to get into in any of its major varieties, right?
It is a big hill to climb.
It is. But I actually think in the long term, that's what's given them strength. Easy to pick up often means easy to put down. Okay?
Well, there's a sunk cost fallacy.
Correct. You don't have the emotional investment. That's what I'm saying. When you paint a whole army or two in Warhammer 40K or Age of Sigmar or something, right? Or Old World or whatever.
Sure.
It's a big lift.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It means you are like, you feel you're probably tied to that property because of sunk cost fallacy in some way for a while. And I think that like that combined with all the lore and the novels,
the lore does the majority of the heavy lifting. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's just this ecosystem, right?
Absolutely.
It's kind of kept them in play. That these other things can't match. That's my point. They all end up, they don't have the depth.
The other things, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, and I think we're going to get into it. If I can for just a second, I remembered when we were talking about the ICV2 thing, I remembered seeing a screenshot or a photograph from Gamma. There was a discussion going on, like ICV2 was giving a talk, and there was a slide they showed up on the screen. and it showed the top miniature lines for fall of 2024. So number one, if this is fall of 2024, was Warhammer 40K. We
Sure.
mentioned earlier.
Not
Sure.
surprising.
Number two, do you know what it was?
Was it not Marvel?
Nope.
Okay, what was it? I don't know.
BattleTech.
BattleTech.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then number three was Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures, which is basically those WizKids pre-paints.
Oh, yeah, I know what they are.
Which I mean, there's a tons of those, but that's all, yeah. And then number four is Age of Sigmar. So Age of Sigmar was beat by both BattleTech and Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures, which is interesting.
Ooh, that hurts.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting.
Then I have to change my other weekly show.
Right, yeah. And then fifth place is Heroescape, which has come back all of a sudden. You know, with the plastic tiles?
Yeah, I know what it is. I can't believe it's number 5, but
I know. Yeah.
Wow.
And now number 6 is Marvel Crisis Protocol.
Wow.
And then number 7 is Halo Flashpoint from Mantic.
Wow.
I know. And then number 8 is
Bones. This is revelatory.
Right, yeah. Bones from Reaper, which, you know,
sure,
that makes sense. Yeah, I get that. And then number 9, and this is astounding to me, Song of Ice and Fire.
That's not too surprising at number 9. I buy that.
Scott is the only person I know in the world that plays that game.
And he's buying a lot of figs.
Yeah, he is. Must be. And then number 10 is War Machine, but now from Steamforge, not from Privateer Press, obviously.
Sure.
What don't you see on that list?
Any of the Star Wars stuff we talked about?
Star Wars Legion, Star Wars Shatterpoint. Those are the only two that are still standing. So Star Wars X-Wing was top of that list 2 quarters in a row back in like 2015 or 2016 or whenever that was.
Right.
Now they don't even make it anymore. And we're talking about Star Wars. That's a big license. And the Star Wars license is still being used now by a company called Atomic Mass Games. And it's still not in the top 10 right now. Neither Legion nor the new one, which is Shatterpoint, which is basically the same game. Not the same game, but it's the same scale and same size and stuff like that, like the Marvel Crisis Protocol. It's very interesting how much fluctuation there can be floating around underneath 40K in so many different situations.
Yeah.
But the question is, I guess, that we're talking about is at which point, you know, do you see the dip, and where does that dip come from?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. What a fascinating list. Here's the thing. You might say to me, well, Vince, doesn't Star Wars have the lore and the depth and stuff like that? Isn't that a thing? Well, first of all, Star Wars is like a skirmishy thing, and you're not really painting your figs as much and whatever, often. I understand with Shatterpoint you are, but with
Shatterpoint and Legion, both of them you are. But no, the X-Wing, they were pre-paints, which gave them a wide audience, but that's not necessarily, you're not as attached in that situation for sure.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And even with Legion, it's not, you've painted a Legion force, right? It's not that big.
Okay. No, it's not as big as a 40K force. No, I knew. But that's the thing. Like, for some folks, that's the hill they don't want to climb. Like, I have painted a 1,500 point force of GW Warhammer back in the day, a Chaos Force. I don't think I ever painted a full 2,000 point force.
Sure. I mean, I've painted 21 armies, so I don't think I'm the person to talk to. But
yeah, exactly. I get
that. But my point is that, like, that which is too easily earned is too lightly esteemed, right? Like, this is a very classic thing. And I don't, first of all, this isn't a Star Wars lore podcast, but here's my controversial hot take. I think Star Wars lore is boring and shallow. There you go. That's what I have to say about that. So
I saw a video recently where like a guy was like talking to himself, like he had, CG'd himself into the cantina, and he was playing 2 different characters, and they were having a conversation, and they were going through and talking about every single weird alien creature that's in that scene in episode 4. And they're talking, and I thought they were making up all this but no, there's background for every single one of
all of them. Yeah.
And then like one guy's like, well, what's that guy's deal? And the other guy's like, oh, well, do you see? And then it's just, I'm like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And then I'm like, I looked a couple things up on like Wikipedia, which is what it's called. And no, that's exactly what that guy's deal is. And I'm like, who says, when did that ever come up in something? But they've made so many books and so many comics, and they go back to the well and go, God, we need a bad guy let's make him one of those guys who was in the cantina. You know what I mean? And then boom, there you go. Now that guy's got lore.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can like Star Wars. I'm not trying to,
Yuck your yum.
rain on your parade or whatever. Like,
Mhm.
general listener, please don't be offended. But I'm just saying, I find it to be a shallow world. The BattleTech thing, almost like BattleTech, you don't paint a lot of minis. Again, it's very
Right?
small skirmishy
Generally.
game.
Yeah, for the most part.
4 or 5 mechs as your lance or your star or whatever.
Mhm.
Now, the BattleTech lore is deep and awesome and amazing and entrenching with like really good characters and stuff like that. So I have full marks there. I'm a huge BattleTech lore fan. But
Mhm.
my point is that nobody else has really managed to capture the full on ecosystem that GW has created with like the
Mhm.
lore, the you have to go like all in. And then the more you are, that like encourages the formation of these little pods and groups that all put pressure on each other to stay into the thing because the sunk cost fallacy gets multiplied once
Mhm.
groupthink is applied, right? And all of this. And so it's just kind of stuck there. So if we should also say very quickly that it's actually really, really expensive to become a miniatures company. Okay.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
That
Like if you want to
sells
be an
miniatures.
RPG company, you can be an RPG company tomorrow and start making physical books for relatively little money comparatively. I'm not even
And
talking about print on demand. I'm saying like you want to put stuff in stores. It
sure.
is pennies compared to what it takes to be a miniature company.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you do want to do print on demand and be an indie game developer, which is, kind of the whole point of the podcast,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's incredibly in comparison to making a line of miniatures, it's incredibly simple to make a book like Vince and I do and put it on a print on demand, or even say, let's not print it, let's just make it a PDF and put it out
100%.
there. Yeah, it's way, 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 way easier and cheaper.
Yes. Whereas if you're trying to produce physical miniatures, God forbid you want them to be plastic because
Oh,
then
for
you've got to
ugh.
go like, I mean, the costs are just going to skyrocket, right? And by the
Mhm,
way, if in your mind, you were like, well, we're going to be the GW killer, right? Imagine you're the person sitting there at point zero saying like,
mhm.
I'm going to make the company that's going to kill GW. Okay. Or whatever, right? That's going to beat them in the marketplace.
Sure, exactly.
Um, that like that would require such an insane amount of capital. There's no one who would spend that money, right? You'd have to be like some lunatic billionaire with just no better things to do in your mind.
Do you think that companies like Asmodee were thinking we're going to do that? And here we've got this expensive Disney property, this Star Wars Legion. There's no way that this is going to fail. And here we are now, sometime later, and it's. I mean, I guess that they're coming out with new Legion stuff, but it feels like they've already decided that the wagon they're going to hitch their cart to is actually now Shatterpoint instead. Like it's just that when you said this, if you would say to somebody, "We've got a near infinite amount of money, we're going to launch an entire line of miniatures, and it's going to be Star Wars," every person should be like, "Oh, that's going to do super well," and it did for a while.
Until it didn't.
Exactly.
Because it just didn't have the endless like release cycle, the growth, the depth, all of that. Yeah, no, I agree. That was do I think that somewhere inside their business there was a PowerPoint where they had a business plan where they had charts where they overtake GW? Yes, I believe that
Oh,
PowerPoint
absolutely.
existed.
Sure. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And
Okay.
then, every quarter they're like, "Huh, we're not meeting projections. Weird." And then it's just yeah. And I'm not this is not necessarily I'm not particularly pro or anti GW in this conversation. So this
Right.
is
No, of
not a
course not.
like, "Oh my god, GW is unbeatable and it's awesome." It's just momentum. It's just
Yes.
years and years and years of being where they are. And they've gotten bigger like they were like they were beat by, X-Wing for a while. They were beat by War Machine for a while. They
Yep.
were
Correct.
nearly beat by themselves for a while. Like, if you like,
You've segued so well into the next thing I want to talk about.
if you
Absolutely.
you know how have you ever see the podcast that Peachy did, I think, when he was back on the painting phase and talked about how in 2019 they were almost about to go bankrupt, and then they came out with, contrast paint, and that kinda saved the company for the 28th time or whatever?
Yeah, I think that's somewhat overstated, but yes, it
Sure.
was like they were their financials were not anywhere near where they needed to be, and
Right.
contrast paint was such a huge game changer for them.
Mhm.
Absolutely, it put them like well back into the black.
Exactly.
And yeah, 100%. Which leads me to the next thing. Okay, I think the actual threat, the main threat to GW, as history have shown to Games Workshop, is Games Workshop. They're their
Oh,
own worst enemy, as is
absolutely.
usually the case when you're the market leader,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. You have everything to lose.
Your biggest threat when you're the big boy in the market is that you get complacent, you stop innovating, you stop creating, you stop moving your market, and then you start bleeding customer share, right?
Mhm, mhm.
This has happened again, like just an infinite number of times, right? Everybody wants to win until you're number one, then you get lazy. That's
Right.
what happens. And they haven't helped themselves. By the way, to return back to the D&D example, WotC did this recently when they shot themselves in the foot with their whole open game license
Yep.
controversy and so on, right? Like
Exactly,
when you're
yeah.
the biggest person, you oftentimes like a lot of corporate people get involved who don't understand the market and don't understand the users and don't understand the players or whatever, and then bad decisions get made. You could argue that like the way Warhammer Fantasy died and AOS was launched is a good example of that.
Mhm.
Jervis is on the record saying he wrote the original Age of Sigmar to be a 12-page rule book, and he was happy with it. He thought it was good and useful. And
Mhm.
then somebody came to him and said, it's got to be 4 pages, period. And they made him cut 8 pages out. I'll
Right.
state 6 months later, they came out with a 12-page rule book, and that's what everybody used.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Because he was right, because he's Jervis. He wrote some of the best and most creative rules in the world for 30 years.
Mhm. Just a little side note, did you notice that he's gonna be working with, Trench Crusade?
I did see that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just saw that today after I got back from, GaryCon. And I think that that kind of maybe leads a little bit, to some degree, into, like, yes, GW is its own worst enemy to some degree, but I think that the time that we're in right now mixes in, and this is again an indie game and indie game design podcast. There's never been a time in history where it was as easy to have as many different indie games out there as there is now.
That's right.
And that is another of the thousand cuts that I think that GW could potentially suffer. Like, not only are they doing themselves a disservice, but that there are so many different, even small little kind of indie things that can take your focus elsewhere as a gamer and be like, you know what, I don't even want to mess with that. Like this game, 1490 Doom, you need 3 dudes. I got 3 dudes. This is great. That's all I need. You got 3 dudes. I
That's
got
right.
3 dudes. We're playing the game. And so they really are. Yeah, they've put themselves in some situations, and I think that um, even small little indies can come along and really start to kind of like nip at the heels. And then indies that are all of a sudden really hitting some sort of zeitgeist, like Jervis
Like
Johnson
Trench
and Trench
Crusade.
Crusade, and and all those
Yeah.
different, like there's a lot of big names working for that all of a sudden, and a lot of them are XGW. It's really interesting.
Weird.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and by the way, again, this is like no different if you look back at other gaming industries. Like the wargaming industry is just going through what a lot of other industries went through. If you looked at like again, if you go back to the early RPG world, those people, those generations left started their own RPG companies, right? Who would
Hmm.
then end up going on to compete and so on and so forth. The people who were behind Paizo and stuff like that were people who often worked with wizards and or for D&D companies and on and on and on. So
Hmm.
that's not weird. That's just the industry.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's actually the real answer to the question and what ties this back to indie games. Because I think history has shown that fundamentally trying to come out with a new elephant, like a bigger elephant, right?
Right.
They're the elephant in the room. I'm going to be the bigger elephant in the room.
Hmm. Hmm.
That has proven to be more or less untenably impossible, right? I'm not saying it's like 0%, but it's proven to be so hard as to not worth it for the costs and the all the things we've talked about. But I think GW's own sort of their own goals that they've done, recently. And I could point to a lot of different things that happen. Okay. It's not
Yeah.
that they're a
Yeah.
bad company. I
No.
think that like there's plenty of good people who work there. I think the people who make these games care a lot and want them to be the best
Absolutely.
product possible.
I think the suits
But
get in the way a lot, as is the
exactly.
case in a lot of situations.
You got a lot of senior people who are concerned with what was that again?
Hmm.
Shareholder value.
Indeed.
So, they want that to be a thing, and they're making game decisions for that.
Hmm.
So what this has done is now we're entering into a time where, as you said, it's easier than ever for indie games to get out there, for them to be shared easily, created easily. We've also, for the first time ever, lowered the bar on physical miniature production,
Oh
right?
yeah, you can
Even
manufacture at
10
home.
years ago, it would have been like nearly impossible. But now, and every day that goes by, this gets easier. 3D printers get better. The ability
Hmm.
to create STLs get better. I hate to tell you this, Adam, but there are now AI programs you can use to create STL files. Okay.
Stop it.
This is the world we live in now, man.
Very bad.
Okay, so like you don't even have to know how to make them anymore. Congratulations. Now the bar is going to fall to near zero,
Well,
right?
I mean, it'll be a really ugly bad bar and have too many fingers, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's I'm okay. We'll do a whole AI podcast in gaming later. All right.
Oh boy.
But the point is that, you know, people 3D printers prices are coming down that produce, you know, good quality stuff at home. More
Mhm.
people are getting them. You can even the commercial industrial ones are getting cheaper if you're trying to like actually produce them yourselves. The point being is that what threatens GW isn't one thing. I disagree that we'll get to a situation where like one thing will become more hegemonic. I just
No,
think that's not
it's
how the
all the
market will work.
things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, Bamboo Lab, the company that makes the filament printer that I own and that I like quite a bit, they really like there was a bunch of other big companies that were in the 3D printing industry that were the majority of the market share. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Bamboo Lab comes and it makes this machine that's just surpasses everybody else and just makes it solves the problem that a lot of people had with filament printers in that it just friggin' works. From the time I cut open that box that the printer came in to the time that I had a little printed boat, which is your first kind of little print thing that you make, was like less than an hour. There was no tweaking, there was no messing around with it. Now all these other companies are trying to come and maybe like, well, we got to start making printers that are easier to use. How about that? That seems like a smart thing. And they're heading in that way. Creality, Ender, etc. And it's very interesting. Bamboo Lab this week, it was leaked. It's going to be announced next week, I guess, but it was leaked on Reddit. Their new machine is a 3D printer, filament 3D printer with two nozzles, so it can. I don't know even what they're for, but it also is one of those Cricut machines, like the vinyl cutting machines, and
Oh yeah, sure. Okay.
it's also a laser cutter, all in one box.
Wow.
It does
Okay.
not make margaritas. We did ask, and it doesn't seem to be doing that.
Well,
It also does
that's
not
just a design flaw in my opinion.
doesn't julienne fries, but it does a lot of things in all in one box. And in my, I guess so the comparison is that they're like, oh, you guys are starting to try to catch up, cool. And then here's what we're doing next. And I don't feel like that GW's been kind of doing that. I feel that like again, they're getting in their own way, and they're not like when you're that big of a company. I think you have to try to innovate, and they don't. You and I have had this discussion about how they're never really going to substantially change 40K because that's the golden calf,
Yeah.
and you don't skin the golden calf.
I Here's what I'll say. They have though. They have changed 40K. Let
Well, I
me
mean, there's
this
been
is
changes, but
no no no
like,
no no. Let me get it. I'll get
yeah,
there. I'll get there. Hold on.
okay,
Let me make this argument. Okay. We're gonna do a whole Trench Crusade episode in the future, folks. Don't worry. It'll
yeah,
come. We're both gonna get some more play and then we'll talk about it in depth.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. But one of the things that I believe is the reason Trench Crusade was so successful is because GW seeded this territory. All right. What I mean is that they owned the sort of aesthetic of being grim,
Grimdark.
being dark, being
Hmm.
brutal, being edgy, being counterculture, being all this stuff, right?
Yeah,
That's what made if you look at Warhammer art, right, going back in the 80s and the 90s, even in
hmm,
some into the early 2000s, right? It's gritty, it's this John Blanche style, it's brutal, it's people with stuff stuck in their heads and demons that are somewhat sexualized and you know like it was risque in
yeah,
some degree, right? At least within our space, what counts as risque. That's not the case anymore. Now it's cartoon and light and everything. The edges all got sanded off to make it mass market appealing. They seeded that territory. Trench Crusade is dark as, right? And that's one of the reasons that they were
yeah.
able to be successful.
Oh yeah. I mean, I made a video about is GW Grimdark anymore, and talked
That's right.
about not just Trench Crusade, but several different properties, a video game property, a lot of different things. And yeah, like the bar moves. That's part of the deal. Is that all of a sudden like this was the wow, check that, and now it's like, well, now we're going to go beyond that. And I think that the thing that's interesting about that is that they're not only are they not innovating on that end. I'm talking about more the rules when I said that they haven't changed things much.
I agree with that too. I
Yeah.
think both are true,
Yeah.
right?
Like, would it be better if they would maybe try to figure out some sort of different way to do initiative in 40K, as opposed to we'll roll, and then you move all of your forces and do all your combats and all your shooting, and then what I got left, I get to do it. That kind of thing that it's a feels bad moment in a lot of people's minds.
Sure.
If you don't get to that first turn, and then, when they decided to do Age of Sigmar, they really changed the way that kind of happened in comparison to fantasy.
100%. They were able to throw everything out and start again, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't think they'll ever do that with 40K because it is the big cash cow.
I think you're probably right. We could say the same thing about the lore. We could say the same thing about the models. We could say the same thing about the story, right? That's the point. Like some of the stuff has drifted.
Considerably different and better than they were even 10 years ago, and especially over 20 and that kind of stuff. But the rules, though, they've tweaked them and this and that. Like you remember this back in the day, your ballistic skill was 3. So what did that mean that you had to roll to hit?
You hit on a 4.
Yeah, because you had to take 3, subtract it from 7, and then what the number was what that you needed to get was 4. And then eventually someone finally said, why are we doing that? That's stupid. Why don't we just tell them their ballistic skill is 4 up? And that's what they've done. So they've gone through and they've iterated and tweaked, but I think there's some big things that they don't feel like they can or ever change. And so many indie games and even non-indie games, just other games are just yeah, we're going to take things and take it in a different direction. One of the things I really like about Trench Crusade, talking about Trench Crusade again, is the way that the initiative works. It is whoever has the fewest amount of models, you go first. That's just and then you activate one model, and then your opponent activates a model, and you go back and forth that way. It's not as interesting of an activation scheme as, let's say, I don't know, Rain in Hell, or things like that. But it is very interesting that you don't have to worry, and it gives you almost that blue shell kind of Mario Kart sort of thing. Is if you lose a bunch of stuff, now you get to go first. You know what I mean? That kind of thing, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so look, I'm not saying that I think tomorrow what we would call it the fantasy war game market is going to look like the historical, or the SFF war game market, I guess technically, is going to look like the historical war game market, right? The historical war game market taken as a whole is bigger than the fantasy war game market. Okay.
Bigger in what way? In sales?
In raw sales. Yes, absolutely. 100%. More kits get sold of historical stuff, all writ large than all of sci-fi fantasy miniatures put together. Yes.
Wouldn't that show up in the ICV2 thing? Because none of those games
because everything is way too, that's the point. Everything is so flat. Okay. The trick with the historicals market is that there is no elephant at all. It's flat.
I mean,
okay.
There is kind of elephant-y.
Sure. There are no way. It's not even close. There are successful games.
Yeah.
That have
Bolt Action, Flames of War, those are only
absolutely.
two I can think of off the top of my head, but still they're there.
And then you get back into there's Pike and Shot and stuff like that. These kinds of games, right?
Yeah.
There's all sorts of different ones that are well established and people like and that the Perry brothers, made figs for, all this kind of stuff. Right?
Yeah.
But the point is that there's a particular game that's really good at doing Napoleonics from this time period. Right. And there's a certain game that's really good for the War of the Roses. And there's a certain game and on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Okay.
Right. In that situation, in many situations, the timeline of when the conflict is taking place affects the rules, as it should. So if you want to play Napoleonics, there are a bunch of different Napoleonics games, but you don't just decide to go, well, we'll grab Bolt Action and make it Napoleonic. That's not a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
My point is, if you looked at the historical war game market, if you could really survey and get to the deep details of SKUs sold or something like that, right?
Sure.
What you would see is hundreds of companies with 0.2%.
So historicals are not making more sales at the end of the day. They're just making more smaller sales, but they're not even beating or even getting on the radar in many situations for say somebody like ICV2.
Correct. That's right. Because all of it would be way too small, right? Mm-hmm. No single thing ever really registers. You have 20 lines selling a kit a month or something like that, right? As opposed to one line selling 20 kits in a month. You get it. Yep. Okay. I'm not saying that tomorrow that's what the market looks like. That's nonsense, right? It's a completely different story over here.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think we could get in a place where you have a couple of, if not elephants, I don't know, dogs,
Mm,
maybe what's a bigger animal? I don't
cow?
know,
It's like
like
a cow?
sheeps, a cow, a couple
Ooh, yeah.
cows, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
That's something I think something like, a Trench Crusade and like these other things that are indie that pop up or like bigger that your real cows or maybe like, your Marvel, your BattleTechs, your stuff like that,
Sure.
where enough of those sort of well-established producers filter in and start chewing away with the indies in mass right behind them with a couple of large indies and then a
Mhm.
long tail. And I think that's actually what then kind of brings them down, right? In their market share and their overall dominance to where they go from being a majority to a plurality or to less, right?
I did a video talking about fracturing the wargaming market,
Yeah,
and I think fracturing the wargaming market is the biggest threat to Games Workshop,
agreed.
and it is also, frankly, I think it is a bit of a necessity. I don't think like there were plenty of people and they were in the comments of that video. They're like, no, there should just be one war game. There should be one guy literally said there should be a central authority that says what the one war game is so that we all play the same game. And I think that's
Okay.
a terrible idea,
Like
obviously.
the Politburo Bureau of wargaming. Nice.
I had I had several people in my Discord who were like, you should make a central authority t-shirt. And I'm like, well, that's a deep cut, but um but it is a situation where, yeah, like I think that fracturing is what because the reason that the people who are talking about, well, we shouldn't fracture the market is because they probably play the biggest thing in that market, which in this case is
Yeah, and they want to have lots of people to play against. Like, I
sure.
get it. It's a
Yeah,
natural instinct. You want whatever you're playing, you hope everybody else plays it too. That way you always have lots of people to get a game with. Of course. It's not
generally
weird.
generally when a person says, "Oh, you shouldn't play that game is dead," it's because they don't play that game. And it's because
Sure.
they want to make sure they didn't make the wrong the wrong choice, and they want to make sure that you're somebody that they could play against potentially, and also uh, cheese as a new kill the noob or whatever it is, that kind of thing, which is a bummer. But yeah, I do believe that you know, and we've been told, "Oh, you're never going to beat GW," and we're always like, "Yeah, we have no intention of doing so. None of us
What an
do."
insane thing to say. Yes, of course. We're
Exactly.
two people. We're
Yeah.
two-person shop and always will be. Very
Yeah.
likely.
Exactly.
Like
Yeah.
that's
Like
not
I.
it's not in our business plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But if we can give options out there so that people can go, you know what? I'm not interested in this big game or even these medium games, but I am interested in this small game. And there's some weird vibe here that makes me like it for whatever the reason might be. Everyone's got a vibe about something. Everyone's like, I hate everything about that game except for the artwork, or I like everything about that game except for the artwork. And so the more indie games that are out there, the more swings at that ball that the industry has, and maybe potentially getting you to pull the trigger and buy some books and buy some miniatures and paint some stuff and play some games. And I think that's the thing that if GW's not careful and doesn't seem to figure out a way to maybe innovate in some fashion, and I don't know exactly how they do it, but I think that this will slowly eat at them. This is certainly not going to be a thing that takes them overnight. This is a
No, this is
slow.
termites in the walls,
Exactly,
right? Like it's not
exactly.
quick. It's years and years. It happens, right? And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden your foundation is weak, right, or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah. And that is, I think, the concern. And sure, you're going to get small dorks like you and me out there putting out books and having a good time with it, hopefully. But then you're also going to get things like Trench Crusade that kind of come out of nowhere. I mean, I could see that happening more frequently.
100%. I was going to agree. My big question in my mind is what's the next one of those? And how long until we see it again,
Yeah.
right? Um because that's not the only concept that you could imagine hitting that hard.
Oh,
Okay?
absolutely. Yeah.
So, there's ground that has been seeded here and I think other people will move into the space. That's what it comes down to.
I think that if somebody made a good Gundam game, like all of a sudden that like Bandai, which we were talking today in the Every Other Sunday show on my channel, we were talking about how like I
Well,
was like,
Bandai's
how
making a Gundam game, right?
they are, but I don't think it's going to be a good game. I think it's going to
Oh,
be
okay.
we've got these cool models, and so we're trying to figure out a game around it.
Okay.
And I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think it's going to be a game that sticks necessarily. But this is also their first try, right?
Sure.
Like this could easily be attempt number 1 out of 5 until all of a sudden something monstrous that they put out. And they're a big company. They are a bigger company than Games Workshop by a lot, as it turns out.
That's just what I'm
Bandai.
saying. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So if a big company like that comes along, like again, we were talking about how like there's not going to be some big company that comes along and takes them over, but there could be a big competitor that comes out. And Asmodee did it for a bit with Star Wars license and things like that. And now we're not really sure what's going on anymore. But yeah, Bandai could potentially, because of the popularity of Gundam and anime and all that kind of stuff, from just a few things that we've seen already, the first thing, I'm not necessarily like, oh yeah, that's going to work, but I could see something working eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think, I don't know, maybe this is a controversial take.
Okay.
My take is it would be new cut from whole cloth IPs that would find the long-term success as opposed to existing IPs being mobilized. I think when I look back and like if I look at like Marvel and if I look at, Star Wars and those kinds of things, they hit,
Mhm.
they're big, they fade or whatever to some degree. I'm not saying Marvel's fading, but it is what it is.
Well, I
The
mean, we've
Those
had
things are tied to bigger cultural shifts and movements and popularities. They
they're
will
also
wave on their own.
they're also
You need
finite.
something free floating. Does
Exactly.
that make
They're
sense?
they're very finite. They
Yeah.
they eventually ran out of ships to make for X-Wing. They were like, "Gee, like you guys better start making more movies and TV shows." And they're like, "Well, as it turned out, they did. It was just a bit too late for
Right.
X-Wing, because all of a sudden there was Mandalorian and this and that and all that kind of stuff." But you get to the point where you'd see some of these ships that are coming out for X-Wing, and you'd be like, I've seen all the movies. I don't know what the hell that is. Like, what's going on? You know what I mean? And when you just make the stuff up out of whole cloth, then you never run out of stuff to make up.
Correct.
Secondly,
Infinity is your limit. Yes.
when you are licensing a big thing like that, something like a Disney license, like again Star Wars or Marvel, both of them being Disney licenses, you are basically paying to rent their customers,
Yep. That's
and
right.
you are also then having to give them money off the top on every single little plastic dude you sell. And that's a hard hill to climb as well, which is why these license games from these biggest licenses in the world don't seem to necessarily go. GW is the biggest license in wargaming, but the thing is that they own their own license. And again, the lore has done a lot of heavy lifting, but I don't know. I mean, I could see them get to a day when they're just basically a license company, that they're just a lore company. They're just like maybe making movies and they're doing stuff, but the
Sure.
the plastics is put to
By
the
the way,
side
that's the
because
countervailing force that will actually help them grow if they don't do the other things we talked about, is if
yeah,
they can manage to actually like get their, like they did with Secret Level or whatever, right? Like
sure,
getting
right.
their actual IP out there. If they get the Warhammer 40K show off the ground and
Mhm.
that kind of stuff is
Yeah.
what would actually help them fight the tide. That's what
Yeah,
would keep them instead
and
of
I
focused.
think that they know that, but I also feel like they're maybe focusing too much on it a little bit. I think that they still need to also I don't know, they gotta do something about those games a little bit. I don't know.
Ideally, you're firing across all cylinders,
Oh, of
right?
course. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
actually what's going to make you be long-term bulletproof, is
Mhm.
if your stories are tight, you're in mass media to where people are consuming it and thinking about it off time, and you've got a great game that when people show up and want to have the deep experience, it's there to be discovered and played.
Yeah.
But for now, as long as they're not, the reality is the market pressure, all these indies are coming up. And I do think that, like you gave the example of like the water buffalo getting taken down by all the little
Yeah, just
animals or whatever,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's the
Like a
situation.
bunch of
And
cheetahs.
I think that's, you're going to continue to see really strong growth in indie games, indie game design, and indie fig production and miniature design and all of that stuff for the next X years.
I think that the people have to understand, listening though, that growth doesn't mean necessarily sales. Like no one's going to be making more money than GW, but a lot of
Right.
people are going to go from making X amount of money to making 4 times X amount of money. That's still maybe a
Yeah.
small amount and not necessarily a big deal in comparison. But to those people who are like, oh gosh, we're starting to make some money. That's kind of cool. Again, if you're indie and you're doing it even on the side as a side job, if it's something that made you $1,000 last year, and then in 4 years it made you $10,000, in a single year, that's a pretty big deal. That's nothing to GW, but to you, it's a pretty big deal. And I think that there's always that rising tide raises all ships thing. And if if GW is doing well, then the rest of the industry is doing well. Yes and no,
Sure.
but I think it's not something to depend on.
No, I agree. You could, yeah, I completely agree. Like what they really mean is just if the market is doing well and people are spending a lot of money on collectibles and hobbies, then ostensibly all companies should be increasing, right?
Yeah.
But because it's a luxury good. So at any rate, all right, yeah. I mean, that's my sort of summary of this. Is the answer to the original question is, can anything bring GW down? If framed as meaning, can there be a new, bigger elephant that becomes the dominant force in the wargame space, and we have some new, huge market dominant force? The answer is like maybe, but extremely highly unlikely, just
Yeah.
because of capital and cost and time and entrenchment, all the things we've talked.
Hmm.
But the answer to the question, so if phrased like that, the answer is no. But the real question is, the answer to it is yes, because what actually sort of brings them down from their market share, from their preeminence, is the mass of things altogether.
And also them themselves a little bit.
And a little bit, yeah,
Yeah.
contributing
Yeah.
if they
For
open
sure.
a space.
Yeah,
There you go.
exactly. Yeah. So there, we've answered the question. Like, we just take the immutable and just answer it.
That's what we do. We're here.
That's, yeah,
We're here to reveal, to pull the curtain back.
the
Behold the
veil.
wizard.
Indeed. Well, thanks for checking out all this veil and wizard, discovering episode. But thanks for checking out this episode of SNARLcast. We hope we were able to teach you something. That's the hope. Please check out our website at www.snarlingbadger.com/snarlcast for more information and more episodes. Follow us on your podcast software of choice. Leave a review if you get the chance, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you much.